We're here on one of the greens here, and we'll note, looking around, we have trees, and we're here at about 11 in the morning in October, and you can see the shadows that come from the trees that are placed to the east of us. Let's start there, Dan. What do you think of this tree placement?
Well, unfortunately, it looks like they're just outside the property line, so I don't know how much you can do about it, and that's common to see around the perimeter of many golf courses. And sometimes you have to live with some of these shade issues if you don't have the control over managing those trees. But
what does the shade do, Dan? Give us some examples, because if you are in charge of a golf course and you have trees somewhere near a green, you're going to have to think about some of these issues. So what are some of the issues for shade, Dan?
Well, you'll see that there's moss within the shade pattern that you can see now. You can see the moss that's competing with the turf. So this is creeping bent. Creeping bent's a sun-loving plant. Like you're aware of, like annuals. Some annuals are shade tolerant and sun loving. You can say creeping bents like the marigolds or the geraniums of the world there that needs and thrives on that full sun, where poania, our good old buddy poa, is more like an impatient. They'll tolerate the shade. Same with the moss. And what the shade does, it makes the grass kind of lazy, so to speak, the bent grass. So it gives these other organisms a little bit of a competitive edge. And these are considered weeds and problematic both for playability and agronomically for the health of this green.
So if you are going to plant new greens with some of the new, better species or specimens of the turfgrass that we're breeding now, even those strong grasses are susceptible to problems from moss and poa if they're shaded by trees, particularly ones that are to the east.
Absolutely,
correct?
Shelley, and that's a very important point, because sometimes facilities will take on an improvement project, or they have to resod or expand a green, and you're going to do it usually with a creeping bent of some type. Like you say, some of these improved varieties that the breeders have done a wonderful job improving their disease tolerance and playability, etc. But it really will start to sour if that green isn't exposed to full sun throughout the day. They say morning shade is the most critical as far as problematic, but what I found, especially with young grass, any shade is a problem with creeping bent, especially when it's young. And with the shadow, as the sun angle changes throughout the season, like you say, we're here in October, so the shadows tend to be really long at this time of year. And it's easy to oversee this at this time of year, it seems like, compared to like middle summer, where the shadows aren't quite as long and maybe even shorter lived with the sun angle. But right now, these plants are trying to gather energy to overwinter. So those stored carbohydrates, the sugars that the plant's producing through the sunlight, is being compromised in this area. So this green, you could argue, is going to go into dormancy or into winter, somewhat compromised in these shady areas that might prevent high degree of winter hardiness.
So the first tip for those of you who are watching, I'm sure your superintendents probably know these things, but for those of you who are on committees who are trying to get greens projects passed or want to help them succeed, you really have to think about where the green is, where trees are. If the trees aren't critical, maybe they have to come down if you want the new project to succeed. Because I will tell you, as a long-term greens chairman, one of the worst things you can do is convince your board to spend a lot of money replanting greens or somewhere else and then have it not take. Because the membership will say, you mean you shut down the golf course? You mean we spent all this money and now we still don't have good conditions? They're going to be very frustrated, and you can foresee the problems. So solve them in advance.